I'm Jill Viles, and I've traveled from Iowa to be here with you today. And I just want to thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak. And I've had an absolutely delightful time. You guys are wonderful, really, really terrific people. So I've been invited to come today to tell you a story of the exciting journey you may go on as you take ownership of your medical condition and maybe even look into research and learn more about genetics to try to understand more about your own condition. It's been quite an exciting turn of events for me, so I'm going to go ahead and just talk to you about that. If I said to you, I actually belong in the lane next to a famous Olympic sprinter, what would be your reaction? You might think, are you crazy? Do you want a name of a good psychiatrist? I don't see how that's possible. And in reality, as my talk continues, you'll realize when I talk about the next lane, I don't actually mean the next track lane, although that would be so cool. I'm actually talking about a lane of DNA. And as later in the talk, we'll see a slide of what it looks like when scientists run DNA. They actually run them in physical lanes. So I'm really not kidding when I say I actually think I belonged in the lane next to a famous sprinter. But if you can see in the photo, I don't think you could find two bodies that you would think there is no way these two people could have anything genetic in common. But we'll go ahead from there. But as I say in the quote that they included with the photo, I became convinced I was cut from the same cloth as Priscilla Lopes-Schliep. She's a famous hurdler from Canada. And there's a picture of her running, just an incredible athlete, and she took the bronze medal in the 2008 Olympic Games. So I'm going to start with my story way back when, and what's different than for the rest of you I've been talking to, my symptoms began much, much earlier, and pretty much I remembered being different from as far back as I can remember. It seems impossible that I can remember being a toddler, but I do remember trying to do what a friend did and run and jump off an armrest of a chair, and we kind of did a twirl in the air. And I remember being about 2 years old, and when I tried to do what my friend did, I just kept spinning and spinning. My legs, I couldn't get my balance, and I fell into a bookshelf and cut my head. And I remember not really being that upset that it hurt or that I was bleeding. I was more upset that I thought I was weird, which is kind of strange, but that's how I thought about things when I was 2. And but the doctors really didn't see anything was going on as an infant or a toddler. I was meeting all the milestones for sitting, rolling over, crawling, etc. But when I was in preschool, kind of a 3 to 4 year old preschool, the teacher called my mom and she said, something just isn't right. It seems like Jill just watches the other children run, but she doesn't try to run. And when we walk in the hallway, she trips really hard and falls. And I can remember that sensation of just falling so suddenly. I'd fall with a big smack. And I would get even dust and dirt into my mouth and nose because I just hit the floor so quickly. And then I'd hear that sound of all those squeaky tennis shoes stopping so they didn't run over me. And the click, 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 the teacher would come with her high-heeled shoes and have me walk at the front of the line. And pretty much she just started doing that I just had to hold her hand when we were in the hallways. And when she called my mom, she said, well, I can tell that whatever's going on with Jill is going on with her dad, because when he came to pick her up, I noticed that they walked the same. And we had kind of a waddle to the way that we walked. And it was a hard moment. I think my parents just so did not want this to be genetic. When my dad was growing up in the early 50s, as for a lot of people that also have Emery-Dreifuss, they thought he had polio. But obviously polio is not genetic, so we were realizing this was something different. And we went to the pediatrician, and he had me do the test where you sit on the floor, and he said, can you get up? And he'd asked me to be a bird and hold my arms out to the side and not push off on my knee, and I couldn't do it without pushing off on my knee. So he was pretty sure it was some type of muscular dystrophy, although what Dr. saw most of the time was Duchenne. And he said you'd see like large, lazy muscles, and mine were very, very different. They were extremely small and tight, very, very tight muscles. So it really didn't quite fit. So he said you definitely need to go to the Mayo Clinic. And this is just a hint of what will come in the speech, but if you look really closely at my dad's picture, we did not know this at the time, but you're actually seeing signs of two different genetic disorders. There's the muscle disorder, but if you look really closely at the picture, my dad does not have enough body fat. You can see it maybe in certain places in particular. More filled out from the chest on up, face, neck, shoulders filled out more. And that's actually a condition called Dunning-type familial partial lipodystrophy. They didn't recognize that that's what we had at Mayo, especially in a man. It is so mild. You really don't pick up on it. But in hindsight, we can go back and look at those pictures and see that. But that will be the connection that's going to lead us to the sprinter. So it's a complicated situation. It's actually two diseases occurring in the same person. And there's me. I'm about 4 in that picture. So I don't show too many symptoms yet, but I would trip a lot at that age. But I loved to swim. I was kind of a fish and enjoyed the water a lot. As I grew older, my friends were really, really accepting, really cool with the fact that everybody knew I had weak muscles, and they would make so many attempts to include me in games and things. And one of my favorite memories is I wanted to play Red Rover with all my friends, and we'd stand with our arms linked together. And sometimes, like if we had a new kid that joined our school, he'd take one look at this row of arms and run right where my arms were. So, there'd be a couple kids that would take him off for a walk and have a little talk. And it was never the teachers. We never had to have the counselor come in and explain it, but they would just say, look, you don't Red Rover her. So we would, I just love that I could still play, and everybody knew that's the rule. You do not do that to her. And we had a game called Foursquare, where you'd hit a red rubber ball, you'd stand in a little square, and you'd bat it back and forth to each other. And when we got to the upper unit, the upper elementary school grades, we actually played 9 square. And one of my favorite memories is we would get this wild game going. Everybody smacking the ball at each other. And everybody knew when it came to me, they'd just go, tap, so I could play. And then, I'd hit the ball back, to the next square. And then it'd get wild again. But every time it came to me, they'd just do a quiet little tap to my square so I could play along. And another favorite sport was jump rope. I just loved jumping rope. I would do that all the time at recess. Swimming was still really super fun at age 11. And I learned to roller skate, ride a bike. So I did a lot of these things. But things were changing abruptly as I approached puberty. And a lot of kids really didn't have that many questions about my muscles, but they would say, where's your fat? That I didn't have enough fat on my body. And 9 times out of 10, that was the question I was getting from people. And I would try to bring it up at Mayo, but they would just kind of brush it off, and they would say, oh, well, that's just your muscle disease. But you'd ask any junior high girl, and they'd say, where's your fat? So it was complicated. I felt like there was more going on, but we didn't have the whole picture. And as I hit puberty, 12 and a half, 13, that was really the time in life that my muscle disease really lurched forward. It was really challenging. I was able to ride a bike, able to roller skate, and within a few weeks into that summer between 6th and 7th grade, I tried to go with a friend roller skating, even though I'd done it a few weeks earlier, and I couldn't even stand up on the skates. And I had to go to the food court and just keep ordering snow cones to pass the time. And my bike, I'd feel like I was going to fall forward, and I would sometimes because my arms are so weak, and I'd fall into the bicycle frame. And I thought, this just isn't working. I ended up walking the bike home, and I realized I couldn't really ride a bike anymore. When I got to college, I realized we'd never really been told exactly what disease that I had, which type of MD. So I just started reading about every type of MD I could find, kind of starting all over. And I came upon description of this rare genetic form of muscular dystrophy called Emery-Dreifuss. And it was the pictures. I looked at the photos, and I realized, wow, this looks just like family. And the curious thing is the best model I can give you, if you've never met someone with Emery-Dreifuss, is that a Barbie doll is the perfect model of what actually happens to a body with Emery-Dreifuss. My arms don't straighten at the elbow. They're always, semi-flexed. I can't put my heel on the ground, so I'm kind of in that always heel off the ground, kind of like Barbie, ready for those high-heeled shoes. And I can't bend my neck forward, and I have a lot of stiffness in the neck and spine. And it's pretty freaky that we hand this doll to little girls and say, this is perfect, this doll. And, in real life, she would actually have hemorrhagitis and need a pacemaker. And it's not quite the idea I think people had in mind when they designed Barbie. So when I saw pictures of hemorrhagitis, I took it to a neurologist and I said, I think I have this. I'm really sure. And I dressed up really businesslike. I was only about 19, 20 years old, and I wanted her to take me seriously. So I was all dressed up, and I have my file of papers and everything. And just right off the bat, she said, no, you don't have that. And, I wanted to talk more, and she said, no, you just don't have that. We have more things to do. We don't have time for this. And I remember thinking, well, who's we, and why don't we have time? And it's, one of those clues in life. Your appointment's really your appointment, and if you're not getting the answers you need, to be your advocate and say, no, this is what I want to talk about and get to the bottom of things. The reason my neurologist did not feel that I had hemorrhagitis is it's normally a sex-linked recessive trait, and my case was autosomal dominant. But in my little folder I had in my lap, I had copies of articles of people that did have it, going from father to daughter or mother to daughter and so forth. So I also knew there was a research lab in Italy. They were trying to find the gene. They'd already found the gene for the sex-linked form of hemorrhagitis, which was the gene Emerin. So I wrote to them thinking maybe they wanted to look for the other gene. And they were thrilled beyond words because they were doing an exhaustive search of the world to try to find families that had hemorrhagitis in the autosomal dominant form, and they only had 4 families. So I became family number 5. And I got their attention. I actually took a picture of myself with the timer on a camera. And I just wore my underwear, and I showed how far I could bend my neck forward, how much I could straighten my arms. And they pulled that out and said, she's got it. They could tell by looking at the photo. So that was in around 1996. And it's incredible how much DNA has changed in the last few years. At that period of time, it would take probably a good 5 or 6 years to find a particular gene for a disease. So we sent the blood off to Italy, and that was humorous in itself because I'm off the radar. I don't even have a doctor to work with. So I'm thinking, well, how do we get blood to send it to Italy? So I had a friend that was a nurse, and this was probably breaking all sorts of different laws, but she just sort of smuggled some phlebotomy supplies out one day, and we all sat around the kitchen table, and she drew blood from our whole family. And it was really funny. She was trying to ask, okay, how many milliliters, what kind of tube, and all this. Do we want EDTA, heparin? Is it a purple top tube? And I kind of, remember I'm like 19 or 20 years old, and I kind of just stared dumbfounded. I don't know. And it was a funny moment because my dad, he said, well, you should know. You've set this whole thing up and these blood tubes, and we're going to send them. And it was so cute. I just looked at him and I said, Dad, I'm a kid. And it was a really humorous moment where he laughed too, because we realized, well, this is crazy. I don't know how to draw blood from people and how to package it and So I just went down to my local post office, and I'm there with all the Christmas people, Hanukkah people. We got all these packages, and they ask you to declare what's in your box. And everybody's got happy things like toys and stuff. And then they got to me, and I'm like, well, blood. And they're like, well, like 1 tube. I'm like, oh, lots, like 7 or 8 tubes. And it was kind of weird. But weirder than that was this is something they deal with. There's a binder, huge binder. This person at the post office opens up to Italy to see if they accept blood, because many countries don't accept blood. But Italy does, if you ever need to know that. So we sent the blood away, and it was probably about 2 years later, they found a link to a part of chromosome number 1. So we were getting there, and they were finding it with all the families. And it was another 2.5 years. It came in my email. I just opened up my mail, and there it was, a single G to a C out of 3 billion letters of code. And that's a lot to take in, But just found out that way and told the family. So we were sure, yes, it was hemorrhagitis for us. As time went on, I did spend some time in labs. I spent some time at Johns Hopkins and some time in Florida as well doing internships. But I got to a point that it was so much pressure and so much stress to read about your own genetic situation that actually brought on a panic attack. I actually had 2 different ones. So I talked with my doctor, especially my cardiologist, and we both agreed. We said, this is just too intense. I need a break. So that's exactly what I did. I took about a 8 or 9 year hiatus from this. And it was great timing because I met my husband, and we started dating, got married a couple years later, and I had a son. His name's Martin. That picture's a few years old, but it's one of our favorites. But Martin's now 10, and fortunately, he does not have Emery-Dreifuss as well. So I really kind of didn't pay any attention to science anymore until one day my sister said, "We heard about there's this Olympic runner with the body fat disorder." And I thought, well, now that couldn't be. And my first photos of her were the classic track photos. And she's so enormously muscular. I thought, oh, this can't be linked to us. But we looked at other photos of her just relaxing with her family, casual photos in regular clothes, and there were some things about her body that we all kind of gasped at the same time and said, we recognize her. And I should back up a little bit. In my family, there are 2 girls and 2 boys that have this mutation, and then 1 sister that doesn't. But we have radically different presentations, what scientists call variable penetrance. And when I was about 23, my sister was 11. She came home from the school at 5th grade. She said, well, guess what happened today? And she has a muscle disease too. It's been diagnosed. And she said, well, I won the pull-up contest. I said, the what? This is crazy. I said, I can't even lift a pencil over my head. The what? And she really did almost set the school record. She said she was kind of getting embarrassed because a crowd was forming. She said, well, I could have done a whole lot more, but I decided just to drop off there because it was such a crowd watching her. And this seemed impossible. It's almost like it's too impossible to believe, but we were getting this first really great hint that there might be some way the body can go around this problem. Wish we knew more right now, but a huge clue. But we almost pushed it to the back burner because it's almost like you can't believe something that incredible. How could there be another presentation of this? But when I looked at the pictures of Priscilla, and one by one we invited family members over, and we would just all come over laughing and saying, oh, right, I'm here to see the Olympic runner that might have a connection to our gene. And then everybody would watch some footage, and we'd get kind of quiet, and we'd say, I do see it. It was just an amazing moment. So I went to my family practice doctor, and he said, we did a lot of examination, a lot of reading articles. He said, I do think you also have this familial partial lipodystrophy in this gene, which would be your connection with Priscilla. And there was details of our anatomy. He said the anatomy matches. And one of the really curious things is when I delivered my son by C-section, they realized I was missing an organ. And there was all this commotion behind the curtain, and doctors, especially the med students, wanting to look. And of course, when you're delivering a baby, you're just like, oh my gosh, are they worried about my baby? And then they said, oh, it's just you. And I'm like, oh, okay, I don't care. So they realized when they opened me up, I didn't have what's called the omentum, which is a fatty layer that's just under the skin. And it's where they typically describe the placenta embeds there, and that's where the baby gets its nutrients. And they were just floored because they'd been taught this is essential for pregnancy. And here I am, I have nothing. It's just an empty, there's no fat there. So my doctor said, wow, this just totally revolutionizes some of the things we think about infertility. You guys are really educating different fields of medicine by exploring all this. And so I said to my doctor, oh, how cool. Why don't we call Priscilla's agent? You could make the call. And he said, I can't. He said, that's a violation of the HIPAA privacy rule, and there's no way around that. And I talked to another scientist, same thing. She said, I'm fascinated. I want to. I can't pick up the phone and call. So I realized there was no way to do this. I came up with the magic idea, was a journalist. And one day I had Good Morning America on, and David Epstein, he used to work for Sports Illustrated, and he currently works at ProPublica, and he wrote a book called The Sports Gene, exploring Olympic athletes and heredity. And I thought, well, he's perfect. I'll write to this David Epstein. And I thought he wouldn't write back, or it'd be months. And he wrote back the next day. And he was just absolutely fascinated. He thought, this is really curious. So So let me see. Okay, and so once I got someone to write to, I kept sending more things, and I even sent him originals of photos kind of as a sign to say, you're my only hope, David. And we bounced ideas back and forth. We'd email and discuss theories and whatever. And finally, after about a year of communicating, he said, okay, I'll contact his agent. Unfortunately, he even knew the agent. And he contacted Priscilla. She said, sure, I'll talk to her. And what I didn't realize, I don't think they'd explained that I was weak, just that we had maybe a mutation in the same gene. So when Priscilla and I first talked, we were describing our childhoods, and I kept falling all the time. And there was this pause on the phone, and she said, falling? And so we had to kind of backtrack and figure this all out. And then one of her children bonked themselves in the head and started crying really hard, and she had to go for a few minutes. And I thought, oh no, what if she's freaked out and she won't call back? And she did. She called back in just a few minutes. But there was details about our bodies that even in that first phone call we were comparing, that we knew it was. She said, I think this is the same thing. I said, I think it is too. And the odds were so rare. In this very crucial spot where steroid signaling occurs, there's a steroid receptor, and to really mangle that steroid receptor in just the right spot, it's really something seen only in about 1 in a million women. So, the odds were so stacked against us. But I met her in person in Toronto, and I brought the genetic testing papers and the forms to fill out, a cashier's check. I had a fundraiser memorial fund when my dad passed away. So we had this money to use for it, and they wanted to go the next day. She and her husband were so excited, but they went to several different doctors. Everyone said, I don't know what the Lammin gene is. I don't know what this is. I'm not going to sign it. So it took 11 months. They had to keep trying more doctors, and finally the test was done, and we were so excited. She called me, and it was in the same gene, almost the same place. And I called David, and I sent him a text with about 15 exclamation points to call me. And he had just gotten off of a stage giving a speech, and he grabbed the first thing he could find. He had this little Marriott napkin and a pen, and he started writing all of our conversation, and he had to keep going in circles because he was running out of room. But he said to this day it hangs in his cubicle because he just remembers it was a really special time. And I'll try to move along, so I know I'm almost out of time, and we might have some questions. This is one of the best photos because you're thinking, what does lipodystrophy mean? And you can see side by side, you don't show the fat that would normally be in a woman. And curiously, my family looks like this. Well, but we're not that muscular. The more muscular you are, the more it shows. But you can see that the woman on the right, has a normal distribution of fat, especially in the backside and thighs and legs. And then Priscilla's is slightly different. So that was the things that we were looking at that were the clues to help us. This is another picture. It's what's called partial lipodystrophy, which means some of the fat on the body develops normally. So this is one of the best photos to show the difference between the upper half of the body, and then if you look in the leg, you can see veins, which that's what you see on me too, especially when it's hot. So who would ever guess? There I am. There's my son Martin, and then there's a picture of Priscilla. You just would never guess that we could share something in common in the same gene. And moving on, here's what I said about the lane. This is how scientists load DNA into these wells that hold it, and they kind of resemble a track, so I just love that comparison with everything. And this is a picture of the two of us together at Priscilla's house. She's extremely sweet. Her husband, she has 2 daughters, and she lives now in Nebraska. So the final slide is very, very dramatic. I was so crushed because I wanted to have the exact mutation as Priscilla. And as it turned out, we were just like splitting hairs. We're just a little ways apart. So I Googled her gene or the Lammin gene and her exact mutation, and I came up with this photo. And this lady, pictured on the right, has the exact same point mutation as Priscilla. And this is something scientists describe as variable penetrance. How could the same exact mutation look different in a different person? Maybe a person with a different ethnic background or things, we don't know yet. But this is probably I'd ask anybody to bring it on if they can find a more shocking example of variable penetrance in this. This blows the mind. It has scientists thinking about this right now. Just recently on NPR, there was a segment called Genetic Superheroes, How Do They Overcome Their Bad DNA? And just recently, they've found that there are some people that things we think are absolutes, like cystic fibrosis, for example, they're finding extremely rare examples where someone has absolutely inherited 2 mutations for a gene and they don't show the disease. So this is a brand new, really hot area of research right now. You may even want to check into that April 11th airing of NPR if this fascinates you. But basically, for me, Priscilla's been the superhero. She's surrounded all these mutations all around her with people with a lot of skeletal and cardiac muscle involvement, and your heart has got to be in some fantastic shape to run the 100-meter hurdles. So how in the world she's doing it, I don't know. I just know it's incredibly cool and incredibly fascinating. So I guess the take-home thing is, be excited to learn about your genetic disorder, even if it means taking a class at your community college, learning about biology, learning about genetics. You'd be amazed how much you can learn even in just a semester of a biology class in college. I don't want to run over, and I'm really close here, but I want to open it up for a couple questions.
I'm just curious, did you ever go back to the neurologist and show him the one that said, no, you didn't have it, or he didn't want to get involved in it?
Well, and remember, this was like a 4 or 5 year process, so I did see her a couple times where we didn't have the documentation that it was true. Sometimes in life, I have found I get along with almost everyone, but occasionally you find people, it's not a good match. And for this particular neurologist, I don't want to be angry, I just want to move on. So no, I don't ever see that neurologist anymore, and I don't think I was seeing her at the time we actually got that official documentation. But if you don't feel comfortable, there are lots of fish in the sea. Move on to a new doctor. You should feel relaxed. You should feel comfortable. Warning signs are saying, no, we don't have time for this, because you're thinking, well, who is we? Why don't we have time for this? If you feel uncomfortable, if you don't feel a doctor is listening to you, try a different doctor, because there's wonderful doctors out there, and just keep moving on. And if you have something very, very rare, you may even want to research on the internet who studies this. Some doctors also do research. You may want to see a doctor that is extremely interested in dysferlin. Am I saying it right? Dysferlin? Okay. So when this says dysferlin research, is obviously going to know a whole lot more about your specific situation. But there's great doctors out there. I've met many, and if it's not working, just move on.